Hey guys, Scott and Ivo here of the Gait Geeks, and today we're going to do a little talk on what we like to call, or others call as well, arch fill. And arch fill is something that is a component of an orthotic that you can have ordered when either you are sending out to a lab or you can add it yourself. So, Ivo, how are you doing before we jump into all that good stuff? How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's still it's spring in the high country. We just had it's May 2nd. We just had snow yesterday. We're still snowing here. We had snow about a foot of snow about a week ago, so I'm hoping it'll warm up here soon.
Yeah, no snow here in Florida, that's for sure. It's
I'm
been
thinking it might be time to move to a warmer climate.
I thought of that a long time ago, my friend. Long
Uh,
time ago. So, what are some of the things that you like to use Archfill for? This isn't going to be a very long podcast. This will be a brief one, but we just wanted to talk about some of the components and why we use them and how they're implemented, and what are some of the use cases you like to see?
so if you could bring that orthotic up that you had before. So when we have a basic orthotic, you've got the arch. Hopefully the arch, the most of it is going to be underneath the substentaculum tali, that little shelf that the talus sits on top of off of the calcaneus. And hopefully a lot of support's going to be there. But sometimes, and I don't know how flexible that one is, but the arch is just has
Not
too much
very.
flexibility, right? So sometimes the arch will collapse, or you're using the insole or the sock liner from somebody's shoe. They don't necessarily want to mod it. So we'll literally fill the arch with material and then grind that flat, basically to stiffen or sometimes attenuate shock, depending upon how people are, coming through their gait cycle. If they're crashing through, so let's say somebody has sensitive feet, and you build an orthotic for them out of acrylic or carbon, and it's way too hard. They won't tolerate it, even though that's how much correction they need. So you do a rebuild and you make it out of EVA the next time. But the person is 260 pounds and they're just crushing the EVA. What you can do is fill the arch with material either of the same durometer of the orthotic EVA, which is usually around 70 durometer, generally something softer. We use 35 to 45 durometer EVA. I've got an orthotic here with some fill that we can see. So this is a standard EVA orthotic here. Trying to get the picture right so
You
we
got
can
it.
look at it.
Hmm.
And we filled right in here. I took some 10 mil EVA, glued it on, and then ground it flat. So what that basically does is makes this a little bit stiffer through the arch, but also provides some cushioning so they're just not crashing down into the bottom portion of the shoe. Depending upon where they need the support, you can certainly control where on the orthotic, how far you fill the arch, if you only fill a portion of it. Some people like to only fill the posterior and stiffen it and allow them to kind of fall through. So if you were doing arch fill on a person that, say, had internal tibial torsion, and you want to allow them to be able to get to that first ray after they're going through, you'd only fill the back portion of the arch in this
That's
area
interesting. I've
here
never
and
I've
leave the
never
front
actually
there.
done that. You bring up a great point there, and that's something that makes a whole lot of sense. I've just never done it, so that's interesting. I guess it would be a lot easier to make that happen if you're making the orthotics yourself. When I
Absolutely.
order an orthotic with arch fill, they usually fill the whole thing. So I'm sure I can tell them to only fill half of it, but that brings up a great point. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Or if you get it and it's got fill and you're trying to create that, just grind a little out.
Yep.
And that's easy enough as well. You just
Yep.
have to be careful, like what's the density, just like midsoles in shoes. What's the density of the fill that you're using? Is it like 35 durometer is kind of the standard go-to. Sock liner is going to be more like 25 durometer, so it's a
Mhm.
lot more flexible, but 35 provides just enough give back. It's going to pack out, but it's going to take a really long time to pack out. So
Mhm.
again, depending upon what we're trying to accomplish mechanically. How about you? When are you using arch fill?
Pretty much the same thing. I usually, um, I love arch fill in cases where you order an orthotic without the arch fill and you realize that you need to stiffen it up. Those are the best cases. I think you got to keep in mind also, what type of shoe you're putting it in. A
Absolutely.
shoe with a really narrow throat, has this area for it to kind of sit up in and kind of, nestle itself down nice and level in the shoe. if you've got too much arch fill, what I've found sometimes is that it actually canters the orthotic some. So that's just a component that you've got to address, before ordering an orthotic with arch fill. What type of shoe you putting it in? Is it a narrow throated shoe? Is it a wider shoe? I think it's a great way to stiffen up an orthotic. Like you said, especially with like a softer type of orthotic that tends to be a little bit more, forgiving on the foot as opposed to a more rigid or semi-rigid type of device. Even though, again, you're using EVA. EVA, I'd classify as a semi-rigid type of device, depending on the durometer that you're using. A 70 durometer would definitely classify as a semi-rigid type of device. But yeah, it's just a way to add more support. And I love what you said about really kind of driving that sustentaculum tali up and supporting that posterior aspect of the arch, as opposed to, doing like we talk about with that seesaw, driving the distal end of the arch up, which then drops the proximal end down, which is exactly the opposite of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and that creates problems, as you have found out and I have found out, with dorsiflexion of the first MTP. As soon as you start to raise that head, you start to limit that dorsiflexion, and then people develop this dorsal exostosis.
Yes.
Just piggybacking on what you're talking about, when you're looking at a shoe, this is a Chaco, a little different, but you've got the medial vamp of the shoe as it comes up. Okay, this is going to have the scaphoid pad built into it. But if you take an orthotic like this that's flat on the bottom, and you try to stick that in there, it's not going to fit over the arch, and it is going to tilt. Now, maybe that's going to be a good thing because you're putting that foot in more inversion and you're going to slow down some of that pronation. But if this person's problem is they're not pronating enough, they just need a little bit more support in there, then you're going to actually make that way worse because you're going to tilt it out. We remember that orthotics are shank-dependent devices. They have to lay on a flat surface. So looking at that shoe interface, 99.9% of the time, you're going to have the person take the sock liner out of whatever device they're putting it in to slip whatever you're putting in there inside of there. There's rare exception to that. You're trying to make up for a leg length discrepancy. You're looking for extra cushioning, that kind of a deal. The sock liner is worthless because it's flat, just, the bottom of the shoe. The other thing to be careful of with that sort of thing, if you remove the sock liner maybe on one side and you don't on the other, because maybe it's glued in. I had a kid in earlier today with some hip issues and, rectus femoris, tendinitis. And his sock liner was glued literally to the last of the shoe. So we just rasped it out. I mean, it was pretty easy to get it out to make it flat. But if you have one that's left in and one that's not, now you just created a leg length difference from side to side. So that can work in your favor or out of your favor. If it's on the longer leg side and we put a lift on the longer leg side, we're going to create more pronation on that side, generally speaking, or vice versa. So depending, again, upon what we're trying to accomplish. You can also use two different durometers of EVA and glue them in to the arch, and do that, sort of making a progressive, stiffer material towards the softer material in the front. I find that that's just a major pain in the butt. And I generally don't do that. If I don't do that, I just don't put anything in the front. I don't leave arch.
That makes more sense.
Let them fall off the cliff. Maybe combine that with a first ray cutout to allow them to fall down and try to get that.
A cool thing to also try if you don't have a grinder and you don't have a whole lot of material in your clinic and you want to provide some extra support to the arch, I've actually added a scaphoid pad in the area where the arch fill would go, and then take a scissor and literally cut off the end that kind of overlaps a little bit. So it's a nice width from the bottom of the shoe and the bottom of the orthotic rather. And then a nice sharp pair of scissors takes that right off, and you've got your built-in, because in most cases that arch pad is either made out of a poron or even some kind of EVA. So that works pretty darn well a lot of the time.
Yeah, that is awesome. We don't use scaphoid pads. We just use Met pads, and we have them in different sizes. So if you take a large Met pad, the nice thing about it is you're going to have a steeper side to the Met pad and a shallower side that's the more proximal aspect of the foot. So you can kind of gauge what kind of an arch you want to put in there. Exactly. And then for the scissors, guys, spring for the Fiskars, okay, for the $25-$30 for the pair of scissors. You'll only need to buy one pair ever for the rest of your life to have in your lab. They are absolutely the best just for cutting stuff.
Actually, and to piggyback the scissor thing, my favorite pair of scissors, I keep them in my office. I have like 2 pair of them. They are these, I think they were the Kinesio tape type of scissors. They're amazing. They cut everything like butter. And they last a really long time. So
and they
I
hold
have
a nice edge. Yeah.
They
The
do.
Fiskars are like that. And it's going to be, I think they may even be made, the K-tape ones may even be made by them. But they hold an edge really long, and they're definitely worth it. They come in different sizes too, so you can get little ones and big ones. But we have a pair in the lab that are, of course, covered in glue and all kinds of other stuff that we're doing all the time.
Yeah,
but,
let the glue dry and then just peel it off.
Yeah, you can kind of do that or acetone them down. I just take them to the buff wheel on the grinder and usually take them off that way.
Exactly right. That's right.
All right, cool.
So anything else you want to add about arch fill?
Not that I can think of, unless you got something there.
No, I just think it's a good, quick little tool that you can deploy in cases where, you feel like a certain part of the arch needs to be supported a little bit more, and there's a lot of different tools in which you can do it. Just keep in mind, again, what kind of shoe it's going in to maintain the nice plane of the orthotic sitting on top of the actual, last of the shoe.
All right.
All right, guys. Have a good one from the Gait Geeks. Out.
Take care.